I still remember that chilly autumn morning when life took a turn I could hardly have foreseen. I was a 28-year-old man juggling a high-stakes business trip and the delicate art of fatherhood. For nearly 8 months, I had been enchanted by Alyssa, radiant, unpredictable Alyssa, whom I'd met at a family celebration thrown by her kin. In the delicate interplay of fate and circumstance, she became not only my partner but the new guardian entrusted with caring for Isabel, my 6-year-old daughter from a previous love. Although Isabel's laughter once filled our modest home with hope, shadows of the past lurked in the background. My ex, Meg, a 27-year-old soul I once shared tender beginnings with, now the steady co-parent in Isabel's life. Our introduction had been tentative. I had hesitated, fearful of crossing unspoken boundaries. I'd always kept Alyssa at arm's length around Isabel, a silent compromise to avoid reopening old wounds with Meg, whose lingering presence was both comforting and cautionary. Yet, as our relationship blossomed, we gradually bridged that gap, and 3 months in, with Meg's tentative blessing, I introduced Alyssa to Isabel. The two seemed to click like two puzzle pieces destined to fit, and I allowed myself a momentary smile of relief. Then came the fateful business trip, a 3-day journey summoned by an urgent client meeting that I simply could not delay. Normally, when duty called, I would call on Meg. Her gentle reliability had always been my fallback when I couldn't be by Isabel's side. But fate, with its wicked sense of irony, had other plans. A ferocious snowstorm had stranded Meg far from home, leaving me scrambling for a solution. With my mother too ill to help and the idea of a stranger babysitter repelling every instinct of fatherly caution, I reluctantly turned to Alyssa. I remember the moment vividly, a hushed conversation in the quiet of our living room, where, with a spark of eager determination, she volunteered to care for Isabel. Her eyes shone with the promise of an exclusive bonding adventure, a chance to form a secret world of their own while I was away. The first 2 days unfolded like a gentle lullaby. I'd wake in my hotel room to the soft glow of dawn and catch Isabel's giggles on FaceTime as Alyssa read her bedtime stories. My heart fluttered with tentative relief. It was as if the distance between us had been bridged by a steady stream of digital smiles and whispered reassurances. I told myself that perhaps this new dynamic was the modern magic of parenting, a digital tether keeping my daughter safe. But then, on the 3rd day, that fragile equilibrium shattered. It began with a call, a trembling, urgent ring on my spare phone, reserved only for emergencies. Isabel's small, quivering voice was a siren of dread. She whispered that she'd seen Alyssa in my own bedroom, engaged in hushed conversation with a man sporting flaming red hair and suspenders. The image was surreal, a figure out of a half-remembered fable, inexplicably tied to the idea that my beloved lawyer, Ruben, might be involved. Worse yet, Isabel described how Alyssa had hurriedly packed her favorite clothes and toys into 2 little bags and declared that they were embarking on an adventure, an escapade that, shockingly, would leave me behind. My heart pounded in my ears as I tried to reconcile the absurdity of the scene with the terror in my daughter's voice. Could it be that my trusted partner had taken our shared joke, a running gag about Alyssa whimsically fantasizing about running off with Isabel, and spun it into something sinister? In a flurry of panic, I called Alyssa repeatedly, each ring echoing my rising dread through the silence of my hotel room. When my calls went unanswered, a cold knot of fear settled deep in my chest. I remembered the spare phone I'd given Isabel for emergencies, a last lifeline if ever she felt unsafe. And now, here she was, using it to tell me that the world as I knew it was unraveling. In a moment of frantic resolve, I dialed Child Protection Services and then reached out to my father. The cascade of simultaneous calls, each one a desperate plea for clarity, blurred together as I paced the narrow confines of my hotel room, a silent witness to my own spiraling panic. Every tick of the clock felt like a heartbeat in a funeral march, and I was stranded in a vortex of uncertainty, too afraid to even leave my room for fear of discovering that the nightmare had become real. After what felt like an eternity, a suspenseful interlude marked by unanswered calls and mounting dread, a calm, authoritative voice finally broke through the tension. A police officer explained that when they'd arrived at our home, they'd found Isabel and Alyssa calmly playing with blocks. There was no sign of the mysterious red-haired stranger, no hastily packed bags, no evidence of a clandestine escape. According to the officer, Alyssa had insisted it was all a prank, a mischievous trick gone terribly wrong. She deliberately ignored my calls, prolonging the charade, and in doing so, had unleashed a storm of fear that I, as a father, could not ignore. Even as relief mingled with anger in my chest, I listened in disbelief as my father arrived shortly after, his steady presence helping to piece together the fragments of that chaotic day. I could hardly fathom that a joke, an idea that once made us both laugh about the notion of Alyssa running away with my daughter, could have escalated to the point where I'd felt compelled to call CPS. Yet the raw fear for Isabel's safety was too potent to dismiss, and I was left grappling with a mix of mortification and fury. Later that evening, as I prepared for my return flight, a terse text from Alyssa arrived. In it, she nonchalantly recounted that she had locked the house and tucked the spare keys beneath the same fake plant we always used, a detail that now felt like a cruel echo of normalcy. She dismissed my frantic actions as an overreaction, insisting that nothing more than a harmless prank had occurred. Her words, instead of soothing the maelstrom inside me, only deepened the wound. I found myself too enraged to speak, choosing instead to let the silence speak volumes. Returning home a week later, I spent 2 long, heavy days with Isabel, trying to patch the fabric of our disrupted routine. When Meg finally arrived to take over, I recounted the entire debacle to her, my voice a blend of exasperation and disbelief. To my astonishment, Meg, ever the voice of reason in our shared tumult, remained unervingly calm. She affirmed that, given the circumstances, my reaction was entirely understandable. In her measured tone, she even suggested that if I wished for the relationship to endure, it might be time to confront Alyssa and seek some form of reconciliation. Yet, deep inside, I felt that the fault lay squarely on her shoulders. How could she toy with the safety of my daughter? How could she allow a mere joke to spiral so wildly out of control? That realization led to a decision I had never imagined making. I chose to end things with Alyssa. Determined not to cloak this breakup in the pretense of a bittersweet farewell over coffee, I invited her to my home, our home, once a sanctuary of shared memories, to have the conversation in the stark light of reality. I had already texted and called her, and she arrived a few hours later after her day at work. The tension in the room was palpable, each second thick with the weight of unspoken accusations and wounded pride. Our discussion devolved into a maelstrom of anger and blame. Alyssa insisted that my calling CPS was a gross overreaction, a betrayal of the playful spirit she had always claimed to embody. She argued, almost theatrically, that I had insinuated she was unhinged, a notion that cut me deeply, for I had only acted out of paternal instinct. "You always overreact," she repeated in a tone that bordered on incredulity, her voice rising as she accused me of not understanding her at all. The conversation spiraled, punctuated by stinging curses and bitter retorts. At one point, she declared that she'd been waiting for the right moment to end things herself, a revelation that momentarily lightened the oppressive air, yet only to plunge us both into deeper discord. In the end, after nearly an hour and a half of searing arguments, she stormed out in a fury of insults and shattered promises, leaving me with a headache as fierce as the emotional storm raging within. That night, in the quiet aftermath, I received a series of frantic messages, not from Alyssa, but from another channel entirely. Late into the evening, I learned that she had taken to social media to unleash a barrage of venomous texts on Meg. Accusations flew like broken glass. Alyssa decried Meg as a saboteur, a homewrecker who had poisoned my mind against her. It was a desperate bid to shift blame, a plea for validation that my heart could not entertain. I recalled a recent conversation with a close coworker, Ruben, who had once been our mutual friend, and how he, too, had condemned her behavior. The fallout was spreading like wildfire, and I wondered if this was just the beginning of a more tangled web of retribution. In the days that followed, a quiet reckoning began. While Alyssa's messages dripped with contempt and unresolved anger, Meg re-entered my life with an unexpected openness. One afternoon, as the light faded to a soft amber hue across our familiar living room, Meg visited with Isabel in tow. In that moment, she confessed that beneath her calm exterior, a storm of jealousy and regret had been brewing. She admitted that while I had been caught in the crossfire of Alyssa's reckless jest, her own heart had longed for a second chance, a chance to reclaim the warmth and stability we once shared. With tentative hope, she suggested that perhaps we could test the waters again, to see if the embers of our old bond could be kindled into something enduring. My mind churned with conflicting emotions. On one hand, the raw wound inflicted by Alyssa's prank and the ensuing chaos still throbbed painfully. On the other, the thought of returning to Meg, whose steady presence had always been a comforting constant in the unpredictable landscape of my life, offered a glimmer of stability. The decision was not made lightly. I weighed every moment of the past week, the terror of that fateful morning, the cold aftermath in the silent hotel room, and the angry words exchanged in the wake of shattered trust. Ultimately, I realized that my love for Isabel demanded that I create a safe, predictable environment. With Meg, there was an unspoken promise of that safety, a promise that, despite our youthful mistakes and miscommunications, we could navigate the murky waters of parenthood with care and respect. I soon resolved that any hope of salvaging what remained with Alyssa was irretrievably lost. I did not feel an inkling of remorse for ending what we once shared. Rather, I believed that the burden of blame lay with her, for to toy with a child's trust was a transgression I could never forgive. I explained my decision in no uncertain terms, leaving no room for negotiations or second-guessing. As I watched her leave once more, this time in a haze of defeated fury, I felt a bitter relief mingled with the sorrow of what might have been. Yet, the reverberations of that day did not cease with our final goodbye. In the quiet aftermath, as I tried to piece together the remnants of my shattered expectations, I received a peculiar email from Alyssa. In it, she revealed that she had been grappling with deep-seated emotional challenges, diagnosed with a condition that rendered her more volatile and prone to anger, and recounted painful details of her past, including the recent loss of her father. The email was a mosaic of apologies and justifications, a desperate attempt to explain the inexplicable. But I remained unmoved. Her words, like wisps of smoke, dissipated into the space between us, leaving only the stark reality of our severed ties. In the days that followed, the repercussions of our breakup rippled outward. Alyssa's relentless messages, sent from multiple accounts, continued to bombard me, each one laden with accusations and bitter refrains of crazy and psycho. Even my coworker, once a friendly confidant, distanced himself, unwilling to be entangled in the fallout of her dramatics. My thoughts turned to securing our safety, considering protective measures that might shield Isabel from any future chaos. I spoke briefly with Ruben, whose disapproval of Alyssa's antics was as emphatic as my own, and contemplated every precaution necessary to ensure that my daughter's sanctuary would remain inviolate. Then, almost as if life were determined to rewrite its own script, Meg and I began to chart a new course together. In an unexpected twist that defied the lingering bitterness, we agreed to explore our renewed connection, tentatively, with caution and a fragile hope that we could rebuild what was lost. Over a series of gentle, exploratory dates, we rediscovered the ease of companionship that had once defined us. The air between us, though tinged with the residue of past hurt, gradually cleared, replaced by a mutual understanding that we were both, in our own flawed ways, searching for solace amid chaos. Now, as I sit and reflect on the whirlwind of events, I can scarcely believe the tumult that has passed. From that heart-stopping morning when Isabel's trembling call shattered my sense of security, to the bitter confrontation that severed a relationship I had once cherished, and finally to the tentative reunion with Meg, a reunion that promises a future built on lessons learned and hard-won resilience, I have emerged profoundly changed. I no longer cling to the remnants of a romance defined by reckless humor and dangerous pranks. Instead, I embrace the sober truth that, when it comes to protecting the ones we love, there is no room for frivolity. In the quiet aftermath of these events, I find myself both relieved and saddened. Relief, because I have taken decisive action to shield my daughter from harm. Sadness, because the cost of trust betrayed is steep indeed. As I prepare for the next chapter, a chapter in which Meg is set to move back in and the echoes of Alyssa's misguided antics recede into memory, I cannot help but wonder, can we ever truly escape the consequences of our actions? Is it possible to rebuild what has been so irrevocably broken, or must we simply learn to live with the scars? For now, I choose hope, a hope tempered by wisdom and the unwavering love I hold for Isabel. I have learned that in the labyrinth of human relationships, every twist and turn can lead to unforeseen dangers, but also, if we are brave enough, to unexpected redemptions. And so, as I step into a future marked by both caution and the faint promise of new beginnings, I vow to protect what matters most, no matter the cost. This is my story, a tale of a prank that spiraled into chaos, of trust betrayed and hearts mended, and of the fragile, enduring power of love and responsibility. What will tomorrow bring? Only time will tell, but tonight, as I watch the soft lamplight dance across our quiet living room, I know one thing for certain: the journey toward healing has only just begun.